Got it.
Very
So I was
hungry.
It's gonna be close because of the noise or something.
Yeah, that's the only problem. And if you find it's too much,
Pretty much
then
by-
we'll
Well, I guess when the other place opens, right? Yeah. Okay. Well, that's not the cricket. That's just like
It was
maybe it'll be hard, but
Oh, so all these chairs?
oh yeah.
And then I like,
Yeah.
Okay. We're live. We're live. Okay.
some of my friends said, like, oh, I wanna look at
Yeah.
We're gonna miss you. I'm glad there's. Oh, you're coming back on the week CBC to like actual practical cold.
Alan? Yeah, good.
More chairs here.
We're just slowly waiting to bring everyone together.
Yep.
So we're gonna be bringing more chairs in.
Yeah, no. No. Yeah.
My weird vinegar part.
I can't wait. I love a weird carbonated beverage.
Yeah.
So we're gathering on anarchist time,
All right.
as per usual. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are on unceded Lekwungen territory, home of the Songhees and Esquimalt peoples. This territory is an overlapping territory with the Wasanich people who also live in the near to this area. It's important that we keep the territories in our hearts and in our minds to understand that this place is a place of colonization, and that at the time we are living in is a time where we need to uplift and build up for Indigenous sovereignty. And so that is the purpose for what we are trying to do here at Camas. One element is to be good allies as much as we can in solidarity with the Indigenous people of these regions. So without further ado, thank you everybody for arriving today and for spending time with us tonight. We are very pleased to have John Zerzan with us. And I'm grateful that everyone here has agreed to wear the mask. That's something that we hold important here at Camas because we do care about everybody's health, and the more safe that we can make everybody, the better it is for everybody. The bathroom is over there. If you need to go to the washroom, feel free to just get up, don't worry. But please shut the door after you're done. At the end of this evening, we are going to have space for discussion and question and answer, which I will leave to John. And if you have anything you want to say or engage with, you are more than welcome to do so. Again, thank you for joining us, and thank you, John, for coming all the way out here. We are so grateful to have you.
It's so cool to be back here at Camas for quite a while and hear how well everything's going. Any friends of Kevin Tucker? All right. You met his friend? Very cool. Maybe I'll take care of that later. Well, I wanted to do sort of a brief overview. I mean, probably most of you know all this stuff, but let me start by just saying I think the word is getting out that the dominant order is definitely broken civilization is just grandly, visibly failing at every level and in every area. There's, you may have heard there's flooding in Death Valley, California right now. I mean, all the bizarre droughts and fires and extremes, and the oceans are rising and warming and filling with plastic, and we could go on for a very long time with the litany of physical, environmental disaster, but of course it's also the social fabric. It's worse in some places, like the States, in that respect, in terms of suicide and opioid deaths and so many different things. Yeah, mass shootings, which is not just an American thing anymore. You can see it in other countries. I don't know if it'd be valid to say it spreads from the U.S., but it's not just a horrific American thing. I don't know who disputes the idea that civilization is collapsing now. I ran across just the other day a line from Zizek, our friend Zizek, who's certainly no anti-civilization thinker, from 2008, and I don't think the piece was worth much, but he said somewhere in this thing that it's a good idea to use instrumental reason, I think he's talking about reforms, to stave off the inevitable collapse of civilization. Okay, the inevitable collapse of civilization. This is Zizek in 2008. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it seems to me there are certainly various cultures, but now there's only one global totalizing civilization under the sign of capital and technology, and things are going south in a hurry. So what we wonder about is what is the response? Is there a response? Is that part of the dialogue in society, the conversation in society? Not very much, not yet. We're just flooded with the political stuff. The media is satisfied to fill everything with that, and in the States, and, somewhat the same here, I guess, billions are spent on having us jump through these electoral hoops. It's easier to loathe Trump. I loathe Trump, but I mean, that's a big obsession. And they talk about Watergate, but when you think about it, what difference does it make? I mean, there are issues that are very important. I'm not saying that, but the reference to Watergate, I don't want to get into a whole bunch of American political stuff, but Watergate, what did that change? What's the difference? I mean, fundamentally, it's the same old shit. There's no addressing the much deeper things that are going on that are just turning into catastrophic stuff on every level. And we've known a lot of this for some time. I think of Joseph Tainter, his book, The Collapse of Complex Societies. That's from the 90s. And he was no anarchist, but he said, that's the way civilizations run. They go past their carrying capacity. The parasite consumes the host. End of story. One after another. And then finally there's only one left, and it involves everything. What is outside of civilization? There are very important struggles within civilization. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't deny that whatsoever. Or one of my favorite pieces by another non-radical person, Sigmund Freud, the Civilization and its Discontents, which is profoundly radical. He just pointed out, one of his later essays, that civilization is repression. And it's the main engine of neurosis, of unhappiness. We're not built to not have eros and freedom like we had before domestication and civilization. So people don't get over it. They don't. I mean, he, as a good bourgeois, he might say, well, that's the way it is, it'll turn out okay, or something like that, but he didn't. But on the other hand, he didn't say the obvious conclusion is you get rid of it. if that's what makes everybody fundamentally unhappy, well, no, he's shrunk from that. But if you look at domestication, like, you break a horse, the term is pretty telling. You tame a horse so it can work for humans. Well, as far as I know, I could be wrong, but the horse doesn't have continuing neuroses. It's a different animal. That's the nature of domestication, becomes a different sort of animal. Anyway, that isn't the case. That's the point Freud was making. It's just, we don't get over it. It just hangs over us, and it takes a giant effort to maintain civilization because at bottom nobody wants it. But you don't get to talk about that very much. And maybe the time has come. And now, I know the term late whatever is kind of silly, but in late civilization, it's technology that more and more calls the tune. I think it's kind of clear. Political discourse since the Enlightenment has been what is discussed, who has rights, and so forth and so on within civilized society in the West anyway. And so I think maybe we've got to the place where, even though that's the only thing you see in media, it's kind of lost its verve, and technology more and more makes those claims or promises that political stuff used to, I think more and more so. And you see all these huge statements, these claims in all the ads that are just mammoth lies. And you start to look at it. I think the main one is we're all connected now. Right? We're all connected around the world simultaneously. My radio show streams all over the world instantly. So, well, we've never been more disconnected. I think probably U.S. is the worst example, but depression, anxiety, loneliness, huge amount written about that, in many other countries too. I think of the UK. But so, where's the connectedness? The machines are connected, but something kind of in social media, which more and more people are fed up with, I guess, but it's anti-social. It's not. We're not connected. Where's the community part? Where's the real place of the connection? And it rolls along and it gets worse and worse. The metaverse from Meta, which used to be Facebook, I mean, that's really incredible. And who knows if it's going to work? Nobody knows how it works even, but that's virtual and digital combined to really often offer no less than a dematerialized reality. Just think of that. I mean, it's gotten more. It's almost transcended the transhumanists' fever dreams about the singularity when we merge with technology and then we'll never die and all that craziness. We don't hear much from the transhumanists. I'm not sure why, but maybe it's because reality is kind of outstripping their unhealthy, crazy shit. The metaverse. I mean, I don't think it's going to fly this time around. It's just my own guess, but you can see what's coming, what's on offer, what they're planning. And it's the same with a lot of the rest of it. The algorithms, we're all sort of herded along by the mechanism of algorithms, which reads our desires and makes for this homogenized world. People don't really know how algorithms work, I don't think. I don't, but I mean, I don't think people do, even the people that are behind all that stuff. It's a deeper thing than that, I think. And there's a lot of stuff written about all this. I mean, I think of Sherry Turkle. Maybe you've seen some of her books. She's written about the terrible impacts of the technological society. She spoke in Eugene a few years ago, and it was a very moving talk with special reference to her daughter, who was, I think, 13. And she said somewhere along the lines that her daughter doesn't really recognize the difference between animate and inanimate. It's kind of staggering. The machine or life, you don't get that? I mean, wow, holy shit. So she gave this well attended, really, really amazing. And then at the end, in fact, she said, "Oh well," and closed the speech. I mean, it's just fucking amazing. And I was just so upset. I was the first to get to my feet, and I said, "That's just moral and intellectual bankruptcy. You can't give us every reason why it's so hideous, so negative, and just say, oh well." And she she just ignored that. She didn't even bother to try to shoot me down. It was amazing. And then there was one other person along the same lines, although she could sense what the answer was going to be, and her question was a little more tempered than the point I was making. She said something like, "Well, do you think maybe there could be a slowdown of it, somehow a little bit?" And she said, "No." I said, "No." I mean, what the hell? What kind of hypocrisy is that? And so you get a lot of good books, only they just crap out at the end. Even David Abrams' 12 Essentials, it's a great book. But toward the end he says, "Oh, but don't get me wrong, I don't want to get rid of any of this stuff." Really? I mean, that's a bad joke. You just, or I don't know, is that how you get published? By just laying on your back with it or something? But, there are also some good stuff going on. Ruth, what is her name? Kimmer.
Robin Kimmerer.
Robin Walker, I'm sorry. Her wonderful book, Brain and Sweetgrass, just dropped off the bestseller list, so that's encouraging. Anyway, she was responding to the thing we always hear: you can't go back. Everything you say is probably true. Fine. But no going back. Absolutely. Anyway, she said, we got to go back. We got to go back along ancestral paths. And I thought, whoa. Yes, somebody's saying it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and that's a best-selling book. I mean, that's a sign of something. Instead of just repeating this mantra, it's just a mantra of surrender. Well, we can't do anything about it. We can't go back. We have to keep going on this suicidal path until everything's gone, until life is gone. And I wanted to mention Andrew Dunlap. Have you run into him? Did I send you the link? No. I don't know how hard I don't think this is very hard to get hold of, but I wanted to mention it. He wrote a long essay called, he was living in the Pacific Northwest. He's in Europe now. But anyway, he wrote a piece called, "I Don't Want Your Progress, It Tries to Kill Me, Decolonial Encounters with the Anarchist Critique of Civilization." There you have it. There you have the combination that could be a big part of going back along indigenous dimension and knowledge. So maybe they keep opposing these things one after another, but I did want to say a word about the dawn of everything. David Graeber, David Wengrow, gotten a huge amount of publicity the past year or so. Well, a friend of mine is writing a book to correct the record, and it's curious. Graeber is well known as a bad writer, a disorganized writer, in my opinion. But this is a really interesting book. He's actually saying that all of the basic anthropology of the past few decades is wrong. Because, and the funny thing of it is, we anarcho-primitivists or green anarchists or whatever you want to call them, have been so inspired by the literature, by the evidence, by the thinking of people like Richard B. Lee and Marshall Solins, the wonderful, the original Affluent Society, stuff like that. Anyway, they argue, and it's interesting because here you got the left coming around to defend civilization as it's showing its true nature. You know what I mean? It's just something. It's full of. It's just a dishonest book. You know, and they were trying to say, well, domestication wasn't so bad, and you can move in and out of domestication. more farming, more common. And cities were kind of cool. They were kind of democratic and everything. And by the way, I hate to use this expression, but the gold standard hunter-gatherers, pre-domestication, people who lived in a face-to-face, small, decentralized community, they weren't so hot. They were kind of fucked up. So I mean, it's an amazing hatchet job. The subtitle, what is the subtitle? Something about everything you know is wrong or something along those lines. And the funny thing is, yeah, it's not the green anarchist who's I happen to know personally, but he's called us lunatics and so forth, but he's, in effect, he's calling these sort of well-known people in the field, anthropology and archaeology, I guess they're lunatics. Oh, strange. So, who's the goofy people? I mean, he's trying to throw all that out in a desperate attempt to save civilization. The left coming around to save civilization. Well, they've never been against civilization, but this is really pretty spurious that we get to this kind of thing. It's hilarious. I'm not going to go on and on about that, but there were a lot of favorable reviews, and I'm not. I don't have any degree in anthropology, but a lot of people on the left, like Chomsky types, I guess, were glad to hear it. They don't know the anthropology. They don't know these citations about so-called hunter-gatherers. And I thought maybe I was cherry-picking. I wrote a review of it. And I thought, well, maybe it's hard to resist the temptation to go after the weak spots to nail the book. Well, Wengrow, after Graeber died, he was giving these talks, and he was using the exact same examples that I was thinking of. And it turns out these weren't hunter-gatherers; they were domesticators already. You're talking about bullshit. So can't argue with Graeber; he's dead, but they've gotten a lot of mileage. I mean, everybody wanted all with lots of zines. I think it's still being favorably reviewed. There's a few from anthropology that shot it down, and a friend of mine is writing a book, chapter and verse, to correct the errors. And by the way, this friend of mine, James Van Lynen, he gave a couple of papers at the recent, this is June in Dublin, the CHAGS conference. Every 3 or 4 years, CHAGS, that's Conference on Hunter and Gathering Societies. And it's the sort of the big names of the field. And they invite indigenous people. It's quite the thing. It goes all the way back to the 60s. It wasn't called CHAGS then, but it's the same lineage. Anyway, Jamie was saying he was kind of like the maverick, but he got to give these 2 talks, and he was embraced by some of these same people that Graeber and Wengrow were trying to trash. So that is a wonderful development, because some of these people, there would be talks, I've told, where people would say, are you, speaking to these professors, are you an anarchist? Are you one of these primitivists? And they go, oh, I'm a professor, Well, now they've sort of come around to there's a mutual thing going on. They were really happy he gave those papers, and they cheered him on. So something's going on. Because CHAGS, I mean, very interesting stuff, very amazing scholarship, but they were not going to say what you do with it, what possible politics, the radical politics is implied there, so. Anyway, so long here. It strikes me that as civilization starts to give way, it's like a force field. I mean, it always has been a force field, and now maybe even more in these days. And I think it's curious because it seems like all of us are feeling that. I mean, it seems like it's affected relationships and thinking even, and it's really something. It's not just something you can sort of theorize about, but it's a reality on an intimate level, I think it's even though you could say the silver lining is that people can now see it. It's not working. It's really had its day, and it's just wreaking every kind of disaster in so many ways. But it is tough, you know. It's just these are days that are probably going to get even harder and harder on everybody. But as I say, I mean, I think, and you probably could. I'd love to hear more about what's going on here. I think there are signs of energy, radical energy, going on different projects. There've been a couple of things just in Eugene in the past 2 months. We've had speakers come, and I'm writing a column for Eugene Weekly, which is a strictly liberal paper. And
Wow.
wow, yeah, I'm still can't quite believe that. So anyway, and in Lane County, Eugene, Oregon is in Lane County, named for Joseph Lane, who was a pro-slavery politician, where they're strongly thinking of changing it to Calapooya County, the original people. So anyway, that's about all I got. So maybe let me just go back for a second in terms of the technology, in terms of the metaverse. Some of these things are, the pieces have been around a little bit, at least some of them, and it's just as scary as the totality or what they're aiming to cohere into this new reality. For example, haptic technology. Remember that one? It is a brand new. Yeah, you know what I mean? Where the sense of touch is now replicated by technology. That's hard to wrap your mind around, right? What else was I thinking along those lines? Just hard to grasp the reach of this, or the intended reach of all this. Well, robotics. You know, you got robotics teaching classes, taking care of old people. And they say, well, we're not substituting the machine for people. Well, that's precisely what they're doing. And it's moving forward. Well, what's wrong with that? You know, they make you feel good. As the choices diminish, you know, then you're stuck with the machine. And I hope that isn't really happening. But, you know, in a very, very estranged world, that is what's happening. And the technology fills that vacuum more and more. And unless it's can be seen for what it is, as the real fabric of civilization at this stage, and ain't a good idea. Freud was right. Ain't a fun deal. No, and it ain't gonna win. It's not gonna end well. So anyway. Oh, I wanted to mention Oak is the new zine. Yes. We're working on number 5. Steve Kirk is the main editor, and got some very good writers going on with that. It's not an online deal, so it hasn't gotten around all that much, you know. But, and these are some things for Camas. One along for y'all if you want.
Can we ask questions?
Oh yeah, sure.
No, that's okay. I wanted to ask if you thought it was a coincidence that at the same time as the natural world is kind of rapidly declining, the advances in virtual reality and ways of escaping are ramping up. Or if you think that might be something that's consciously being done so that people don't have to think too hard about their actual reality.
No, I think that connection is probably super valid. I mean, if you are willing to trade in reality, well, if reality gets so tattered and uninspiring, or, you know, our contact with the earth is lost more and more, then, you know, what are we left with? And you're more online and on the phone and everything else. Yeah, I think they go hand in hand. I don't know about consciously, but the whole it's all seems to be connected. I think.
Yeah, John, you talked about indigenous lifeways of return. And so I'm interested in how you think about non-indigenous pathways. I recall someone telling me once that there's indigeneity in all of us on some level in terms of a place in the relationship. Long lost for those of us who are the colonizers. So what's the project of renewal for us?
Yeah, John Trudell talked about that some time ago, and pretty strongly, I think. Yeah, that's important. And looking at the indigenous dimension, it is the Paleolithic, the prehistoric, the hunter-gatherer, but it's also right now. And I think that's the more important side. Well, or anyway, it seems to present itself that way. What I was thinking of is the open letter that Kevin Tucker wrote to the journal, the first journal. And he said, what's been missing here? The native voices. What do you think? How much is it worth without that? In Kevin's not so succinct way, but he's making a point. And they were listening, I guess, and they put that right at the front of the issue. Super important. But I mean, the so-called primitivist thing, I think part of it is, and like a few years ago, conversations here, some native folks were not totally thrilled.
Yeah.
They didn't feel, and it's huge cultural differences. I mean, it's not going to be easy, I think the listening to that is so important, and I think it's the, baseline inspiration for anarcho-primitivism. That's why the anthropology part is so keen.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there's just so much to put together. But the Dunlap thing I mentioned, there it is. I mean, it's getting to be clear, not how you do it, but the necessity of it.
Mm-hmm.
We can pull together over common values and desires.
I guess another thing is, I'm a professor, but I'm also a deeply committed anarchist and activist first and foremost. And when you're talking about these people who thought so deeply about the issues, the crisis of civilization, which is an ongoing thing in terms of viability, and people who've done so much work that you've drawn on, right, to contribute towards the kind of orientation you have. What's your explanation for the compartmentalization of the knowledge life from the lived life?
I'm not sure I understand.
Well, this conference, or all these people have been talking about the ideas that you've been mobilizing.
Yeah, well,
Puts it in the spirit of social change.
right.
And what are they doing?
Well,
how do they maintain that critical consciousness and their apathy?
I don't think they're worried about tenure, if that's what you mean. Some of these people like James Woodburn is still around. The last one, he's 90 or something. And the immediate return versus delayed return is a concept that really explains a lot. And yeah, some of these people are still around. Solins isn't, but and the fact that they embraced Jamie is, there's a guy who lives in Alaska. He's not only talks the talk but walks the walk as much as he can. He's up there with the salmon and the moose, and fortunately he's down here sometimes. But it's still the same gigantic hurdle or open question. Yeah, what do we do? I mean, I can think of it's easy to say what we shouldn't do, what we shouldn't be feeding, getting fronted off in all this stupid, political games, and the conversation isn't respectable yet, where you bring in these, what about, well, and even further back to that, what about division of labor, even before, which sets the stage for domestication, I think. And it goes way back, and you can see, it's not, as Tanner points out, it's not a big mystery. One after another, the civilizations die, and now it's not this or that civilization, it's civilization qua civilization. It's the whole ball game, and it's bringing everything down. So it's easier to see, but it's still, doesn't exactly give you any roadmap of what to do. Oh, sorry.
And I was reading in one of your posts on the internet about how you said that at a certain point, human beings went toward domestication, civilization. What do you think that process was like? Do you think it was a series of events over years? Or do you think it was a conversation? Or how do you think that happened, that we went from hunter-gatherers, nomadic, decentralized societies towards civilization? How do you think that happened?
Well, it was, one thing that's been overlooked is how much of a struggle it's been in many cases. A long-term battle between people who wanted to be more free, take what nature gives, and those who wanted to claim land and put up fences and so forth. And there's one really good book on that. It really is, and it varies so much over different places and times, but it was a real battle. It wasn't just, oh, here's a good idea, let's start agriculture. I mean, as if, and I remember when I was a kid, or even later, I thought, well, that's probably how it worked. People got smarter and they figured out how to farm. Well, no, I think it was much more a matter of values and struggles that went on sometimes for a long time. And Graeber and Wingro are correct. I mean, there were some societies that went back, but that's really not, because the whole society changes. All the parts of it together change, and it becomes hard to tackle it because it's all interwoven. It's a totality, and so. But I think there's a deficiency in the literature that there's not enough about the how that happened.
Don, was that Stanley Diamond?
Stanley Diamond, In Search of the Primitive. Yeah, very good book from the 70s, I think. He brought that up strongly.
What was the name of the book?
In Search of the Primitive, by Stanley Diamond.
All right.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Yes, I have a question that may or may not sort of touch on your interest or topic area. But there are many people now who are connected to sort of, I guess, the heartland of, the tech industry, cybernetics, Silicon Valley, who now believe that the possibility of an artificial general intelligence poses an existential threat. Do you have any views on or insights or opinions on this?
Well, from my readings, it seems like the claims for AI are not grounded in much. Machine learning, all that stuff. I think there's a lot of claims that they're not borne out. That's there are people definitely that want that to happen, to see that leap forward. That can be the breakthrough. But that's my impression, that it's really not very. It doesn't really. Machines cannot think. That's an illusion. They can do some things, and they can calculate in billions per second or whatever it is.
Have you
That's
read
what I'm
any?
thinking.
Have you read any of the GPT-3 outputs?
No.
They can write jokes that are funny.
Yeah, language technology. Yeah, there's more on that. And art too.
They can make
Yeah,
art
they
that's
can do
actually
art.
good.
And the appeal there, it strikes me as really sad. Well, there are people that just aren't very talented, so why not have the machine do it? Just give it the idea, and then it'll paint it or whatever it is. Well,
Why learn
I mean-
about their skills?
right. Why develop their skills? I mean, the whole thing is a massive de-skilling. You look at all these areas where, people are just not only they're less robust, but they don't have a chance to develop because the machine steps in and gives you a substitute. Yeah, and it is appealing. I mean, you could probably make an ableist argument. Well, there are people that can't do certain things, so you want to help them. But, there's more at stake from that, I think.
I have another question. What do you, okay, so we can agree that unfortunately civilization happened. So now if we go back, what do we do with all the things that were created by civilization? Language, culture, food, architecture, media. What do we do with all these things that we've built up over thousands of years as we go back? Do we get rid of them all, or do we take them with us as we go back? What do you think? Like, do you know what I'm talking about?
I think so.
So, like, over thousands of years, we created cultures and languages and media and architecture and food and all these kind of things. So as we go back, what do we do with all that?
Well, maybe we learn we do without it. It's healthier and more direct. I mean, I don't know. I mean, one way to put it is this woman in Turkey who said, I think at base, the ruin of this thing is a spiritual movement. And she had to take a bus, so I didn't really get to talk to her. I was fascinated by that remark. But I think it is a spiritual movement, and more people are taking that up, or realizing that it's not a simple answer or result. But I think there's a spiritual value at base of the desire to have wholeness, the desire to have a direct relationship with the earth, and I think that requires getting rid of everything that stands in the way of it. Where we had these capacities. And I don't know if this is too relevant to your question, but maybe it isn't actually. But more and more, this is really fascinating to me. The evidence that we get shows that people knew how to do all kinds of things way earlier than we thought. Like sailing on the seas out of sight of land, or I don't know, like these 400,000-year-old spears that were found in Germany about 10 years ago. Perfectly balanced. Not just some stick somebody might throw, but absolutely perfectly balanced. 400,000 years ago, way before sapiens. And things like that. People had these solutions. Even the cave, the stereotypical cave person, the evidence of how they could drive insects out and they had furs on the walls. Sounds pretty good. It wasn't just, huddling there and freezing or whatever. Stuff like that. So if you can do without things that have helped create the problem, the crisis, and the reality that we don't want, then it's gotta go.
Okay.
But I don't know. I mean, that's probably not a great answer.
If you're going rid of all technology, like including like agriculture, like what would we do? Like would we go back to hunter gathering and like could we sustain like 8 billion, like almost 8 billion people, like that?
Yeah, good question. Yeah. Well, it would have to be a process of transition, you know, to go back to these stages, and I think that's probably what the Osawatomie botanist Kimmerer was saying, or implying, we've got to regain the skills, and ultimately, I think I would say that's what I'd like to see, ultimately, but it couldn't happen overnight. And that's, sometimes that's the stereotype. Like Chomsky said, you want to just kill off 7-8 billion people. You want to go down the hallway and pull the plug on people that rely on the technology. No, nobody I know has ever said that. But you go in that direction. There are ways to handle these things as we move back, I think, and I think that's why Kimmerer said that. It isn't just some fantasy or utopia. How did they do it? What did they live? How did they live? What did they eat? Things like that. Even take the hospital hallway where you pull out the plug. You can get on your bicycle and generate enough power to do stuff. It doesn't take a worldwide grid that's killing everything. Oh. And then you can move away to simpler stuff. And we were once way stronger, way more robust. And now we're not. So it's not a simple thing. If I was just thrown out in the wilderness, I'd die pretty fast. Very, very damn likely. But, anyway, those are the basic questions I think you raised.
Oh yeah, I'm just wondering. So when a lot of people think about the future of civilization, we get this very, this socially constituted image, totally full of ideology of like flying cars, and everyone has their little nuclear family that's all high tech and everything's all automated, and it doesn't matter where we're getting our food from, whatever. There's just this image, and it's super powerful, and I think it's still very appealing to a lot of people. So how do you think like alternative narratives of what the future could look like, how are those built? Like, can those be built at a really intimate level, like over generations even, just through affinity groups, or does it take something different? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, yeah, it's our friend Fern is trying to see and to study people off the grid that are trying to do the practical stuff, to figure it out and develop along those ways. I guess overall, I just feel like there will be a will to do more of that, and I hate to put it this way, but as things get less satisfying, life becomes, then they could see their kids' lives being pretty much shredded, then it becomes more appealing. Let's try that. Let's experiment with that. Let's have community, maybe with just a few people, and maybe we can do something there and develop ourselves. But there's some of that going on for sure, and it's the people who do it aren't the writers. The writers are not the ones who do it. Well, you know how that works. But there's stuff going on. We'll, I think we'll get to learn about more of that.
Excuse me. Yeah. It seemed like the climate crisis timeline, that hasn't really come up. But when we talk about this, things taking place over generations, there's a presumption there that we have generations during which this transition can take place. At the same time, that even though the primitivist scenario, which I agree with, I absolutely think that that's how ultimately some will survive. But I think that in contrast to that, we see civilization clamoring, particularly in the global south, for many of the consumer advantages, the materialist advantages that have been the purview of the developed world. Hence, the developed world is disproportionately responsible, as I'm sure you know, for the GHGs in the atmosphere. So, how do you, in your experience, contextualize the crisis that we're faced with, which is truly existential, if not for people my age and your age, certainly for a child in this room? How does that work? How does this transition work when time is so short? And I don't think time being short is a bag of shit that we've been given. I think that that's true.
It is short, yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, that's a tough one, because if it's true that all these pressures are there, I mean, I think there's something more going on there that we've lost. Let me put it this way: I knew a guy, met a French anthropologist in Spain, and he was doing work in deep Guyana, pretty much uncontacted people, not completely, but he was sort of giving up his credentials and going native, if you will. And he told about peddling a canoe somewhere, and his native friends went by with a outboard motor, and they laughed and they said, "It'll take you all day, man. We'll be there in half an hour." But he said, the sad thing of it is, outboard motor, that means the end of your culture. That will be alcoholism and everything else. Not instantly or nothing, but they don't see that. And he said, we can see that. That's maybe the only thing we can see. They have so much knowledge and so forth that we need, but they don't see, in some cases, down the road. Yeah, it looks good. Get there faster. And all the rest of it goes along with that. And he felt it pretty tragic. And he's among those people, and they were friends. Anyway, he was trying to say there's got to be a way that we can communicate back and forth about that. But but there's not much time. I mean, it's speeding up the rate of all these, every part of it, deforestation, 50 other things at least. It ain't slowing down. Even though here in this part of the world, lots of resistance, a lot of really conspiring resistance going on with native folks, maybe.
I mean, this example of the outboard motor brings to mind sort of a major question that I have, which is that if so many of these decisions that people make about, the choices that they make and these technologies that they introduce have these unpredictable impacts on their society, then what makes us think that any decision that we make is going to impact the future of society or how future generations behave at all?
Yeah. Who are you? White people telling us what to do.
Or I
That's
mean,
right.
To put another way, when people originate or bring an idea or a way of life into the world, you don't know or get to control how it ends up.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's unpredictable. What is that novel? Ridley Walker. It's kind of interesting on the lines of what you brought up. I think there's a people a couple hundred years from now or something like that, and they're digging and they find a plane. And in this society, there's a split. Some people say, wow, you can see this is for flying. People flew. Man, we got to do that. And the other part of society said, why do you suppose it's buried in the ground? That was disaster. That led to tragedy. That was not a good idea. So the whole novel revolves around that. They're contending over that very question. But they could see, they didn't necessarily all agree, but they could see this is the ruins of some civilization. It didn't turn out well. They had a plane, but now they're dead. Oh yeah.
Just an addendum. I've recently become familiar with long-termism. It's a concept that was new to me. I'm sure it's not new to a lot of people in here. But essentially, one of the factoids that really struck me, and I'd love to get your take on it because we've been talking so much about the future here, is that most mammal species last, on average, about 1,000,000 years. If that's the case for human beings, then we've got 95% of the mammals called humans have yet to be born. And if in fact they last 1,000,000 years, we will be seeing our descendants, if you will. I guess what they're trying to get across is that the future is just teeming with our descendants, and our death is so much greater than most of us have conceived of up till now, because we don't see the context of our own species lasting that long. And I wonder, and maybe this is Pollyannish, but I wonder if there's some way that if that long-termism could become more concretized for people, there might be a greater commitment to making the kinds of fundamental changes that would be necessary to perpetuate our species. I'm just wondering, bouncing it off you.
That's news to me. But wouldn't it be more like if we have all this endless time, why really have to tackle it? I'm not quite.
Well, I think it's not that we have all this endless time, because we recognize we absolutely don't, given the exigencies that we're all faced with right now. But what we have potentially, based on the average species existence, is the term that gives rise to long-termism for the human species. In other words, the potential of the people we're trying to embrace with survival is tremendous and much greater than I've ever seen in discussions before. And the downside of that is thinking that many of us can't even see past I say us in the most general sense, can't even envision making life good for our grandchildren, much less the unknown future.
That's yes. Anybody else want to take
Oh, I'm just curious, can the earth sustain that, what you're saying though?
Come again?
I hear you're saying with humans living along, but can the earth sustain that? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I think that the only way that the species could do that is if we as humans found a way to have sustainable means of existence.
What about with like climate chaos and all that, and people saying that the world is ending very soon? What do you think?
Well, and then I think about James Lovelock in one of his books in the 90s, saying that based on his research, there would likely be a few 100,000 survivors, human survivors, by the end of the current century, mostly living in the Arctic, which would not look like the Arctic we know now. So, that's one, in response to you, that's one scenario.
Gotta look into that.
Okay.
Yeah, well, you better get some, you wanna close.
I've been thinking about it a lot lately, and how in the technological society he talks about these various things that happen when a new technology is developed, how it must be implemented, and it must be implemented everywhere, and he's got a bunch of them. It's been a few years since I read it. It only occurred to me the other day, I don't know why, that we rarely talk about civilization itself as a technology. And so, if a technology is developed and must be implemented, then it almost suggests a post to that phase, like where something new has happened, right? Because technologies don't usually just disappear. They get moved beyond because something better has been created. I'm trying to think how this could fit into where we need to get from where we are.
Well, it's hard to think of one that goes backward, that reverses course, which tells you a lot about society. I mean, it's a technological society. In that respect, that's where, again, Graeber and Wingo were wrong. It's never been just kind of a fun deal. We can take it or leave it, or it doesn't work that way. And you can say, well, that's linear thinking. Well, that's reality. I mean, or let's find the examples, the evidence for that, and use it. Figure it. It could be useful. But the thing is, the whole society moves together. It's all interwoven, and so that's what makes it so hard. That's why you have to have a more of a kind of a larger target to see the whole, not just this or that part of it. And which only compounds the challenge, the problem of where do you start and what constitutes agency, leverage, all the rest of it. But I just think as people can see more and more, it's kind of an unmistakable picture. Got to do something about it, or just decide that's the end of everything. Yeah, lots of really good challenges, and maybe it's just the opening of real discussion. Put these things on the table.
Would you say that humans, and I mean like the industrial powers, the colonial powers, the consumer powers, are waging an active war against the natural world? Like, would you say that civilization is inherently, well, essentially the antithesis towards nature? Or has it just been like a case in which the regular consumers and those powers and so forth just became so like comfortable with these new ways of technology that they don't even realize that this is causing great destruction and other things. Do you think that this is an active war against the natural world?
Yeah, I do. And I think there's a fair amount of consciousness too. Speaking of the technology, for example, you probably read this somewhere. These high-tech mavens, they don't give their kids the technology. They're more apt to send them to Waldorf schools, something like that. They know how addictive and bad it is for them, and they peddle it anyway.
They still do it.
But a lot of it is just more on a deeper level. It just proceeds, and some people want to just make some money and not worry about the rest of it. Get ahead by playing the game. But I think under the postmodern, when that was in the ascendant, it was not very popular to look at that divide, nature and culture. I think that's coming back, but that's not a bad way to look at it. You can fudge all these things or pretend there isn't some dichotomy, but there is. Now it's more obvious, I think.
Given that at the moment it seems pretty in vogue for leftists and so-called radicals to attack cohesive ideas, how do you navigate linking up with other struggles and other activists, like working towards a common goal, like kind of like the labor struggle or like the trans movement, whatever?
Yeah.
It's really tough to navigate.
Yeah. Well, yeah, to me that, the dawn of everything is kind of encouraging because, wow, now they got to come out after us in a big way. Huh. It's more, the usual deal is just to ignore those people or privately say, well, they're a bunch of loons or something. Not have to be public with your counter arguments. So, but I think in terms of any issue, there's, it's possible to deepen it with, the anti-civilization perspective and see the origins of certain things and how they aren't improved by more technology or more civilization. I mean, there would be people that could say, yeah, but again, but so what? You know, you're not going to change it. Like this guy in Turkey said that apropos of what a woman I know was saying, and he said, yeah, every point you make I think is valid. Might as well argue against the sun coming up. So just the inertia itself is the argument. Can't do nothing. Can't go back. Well, voices like Professor Kimmerer tells us otherwise. How you do it again is the ball game, but
I am, I'm wondering about the role of, and I'm going to make a mess of this. I'm actually doing a degree right now in counseling therapy, and my research is focused on what I'm calling relocating the sacred in therapeutic practice. And by that, really, the more and more I read and the more I look, it's really about decolonizing our relationship with each other, our minds, our feelings, like everything, right? And then you've got evolutionary psychology, which is looking at how our bodies are wired. We're animals, so our bodies are wired to function optimally in certain relationships. And I'm not just talking people to people, but I'm talking in nature, right? And that we're so disconnected from all of that, that we're a mess. And I think, here we are, each of us are one little, whatever, cell in the great human experiment in civilization. And I feel myself that it's impossible there's no fixing this, that change has to come from us as individuals. So that's where I hang out, that's the space I hang out. That if I and each of us individually cultivate a different relationship with existence, then that will have ripple effect, and change will be really that way, right? Versus going, let's come up with a fix, let's put a plan in place, let's change this. I think that thinking is what got us here. So what are your thoughts on that? Just the role of I'm thinking about, I don't know if anyone knows Richard Wagamasi, who's a Canadian Ojibwe writer, and he talked about the grandfather teachings, and anyway, I recommend him, but I'll stop talking there. So I've got so much stuff in my mind. So what do you think about the human being?
Healthy? I mean, I think that's absolutely valid level to work on, and I think maybe especially, as I said, that civilization comes down on everything, including every individual. But it's also, I think, the other part of the picture too, to see the whole, not to make, as an anarchist, I don't want to see people devise a plan, a blueprint, and then go down the thing. No, but to understand the connections with the rest of what you mentioned, with the natural world, with why is that giving way and why is that being trampled under? It's not an accident, it's the logic of the system. And I think maybe that can help empower the individual. We were under the gun in this way, and this is how it works. And, we're supposed to pretty much blame ourselves, right? That's the old...
the pathologizing, right?
Yeah, you buck up, be stronger, be better, and it's not the system's fault. Well, it's,
yeah.
So yeah, I think wherever you are, it's you can do something about it or try to move forward? Just like,
Well, I'd just like to, I'm John's partner, I'm Alice. I'd just like to say and acknowledge that we've just suffered a terrible loss in our own family. And in the process of that experience, I think you can't help but realize how there's this huge disavowal of death in our culture. And I think that has tremendous reverberations. And then you find out everyone has suffered loss, you know, not just through death, but loss of the natural world, for example. So somehow by acknowledging that, sharing that, it just really made a huge difference for us and brought us much closer to family and friends through that sharing. I think there's a path there.
I agree, yeah, 100% with that. I think there's some really beautiful ways that we've forgotten how to be in relationship to one another. And that's where magic happens to me. Like that's where inspiration and creativity and trust and humility and curiosity, kindness. Yeah.
thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
John, for being part of our circle here tonight. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Alice, for coming along and sharing your thoughts with us. John brought a few books, so if you want to spend some time looking at them, there's also the Oak magazine, and we'll be hanging around for a little bit.
Thank you, Laura.
Yeah.
You in touch with David?
Yeah.
Here?
Yeah. Her on how they finish that.